Well, it's 22 minutes after 8 here on Morning Live. Employers of domestic workers are now legally obligated to compensate their employees who are injured or contract a disease at work. Vuyo Mafata is the commissioner of the Compensation Fund and gazetted the regulations to the Compensation for Occupational Injuries and Diseases Act on Wednesday. The regulations follow a landmark constitutional ruling in November of 2020, which forced the recognition of domestic workers under this act. Now, the Commissioner of the Compensation Fund joins us now to talk to us a little bit more about this. Vuyo Mafata, good morning. Thanks so much for your time.
Good morning. Thanks again, and thanks for having me.
So let's talk about the regulations as they were gazetted on Wednesday. And firstly, when will it be effective and what exactly does it say?
Well, this was a notice. It's effective from the date of the Constitutional Court ruling, which was from the 19th of November. So what we issued in the notice was to provide some kind of guidance to domestic employers and the domestic employees in terms of what are the requirements for them to register and how they can go about in registering claims if there are any incidents of occupational injuries that would have occurred in the workplace. We took cognizance of the fact that a lot of domestic employers were not aware of what the Coida legislation entails and what are the benefits that their workers would enjoy under the Coida legislation. So we've sought to then provide that guidance in this document.
So, Vuyo, does this only apply to employers and domestic workers who have assigned contracts?
Well, we do recognize that there are contractual relationships that may not be written down where there is a verbal agreement between an employer and an employee. So we do, as long as an employer, because the employer is the one who has the obligation and the responsibility to make sure that they register a claim on behalf of their injured worker. So we'll then take the declaration that is being made by an employer that this particular person works for them when they submit a claim.
So in other words, if that employer does not actually follow through, where does that leave the employee?
Well, as the Department of Employment and Labour, we have inspectorate that any worker who feels that the employer does not want to comply with a labour law, they can go to any labour centre of the department, report to the inspectors, and then the inspectors will then assist in making sure that they enforce compliance by the employer.
Vuyo, what about domestic workers employed on a part-time basis? How does this then apply to them?
Well, the law does not distinguish between those that are employed on a part-time basis on a full-time basis. For as long as you have an employee in your premises who has entered into an agreement or a contract of work with you, you have an obligation as an employer to make sure that they do have a cover in terms of the Compensation for Occupational Injuries and Diseases Act.
So are there specific benefits and terms of the Compensation for Occupational Injuries and Diseases Act? Or, is this something that we have to refer back to that Constitutional Court judgment to?
Well, so the benefits that are payable under the Act, so we have income replacement benefits. So if the injury, for example, results in either a temporary or permanent disability, that would either lead to a person not being able to then generate an income for some time. We then provide that income replacement in the form of lump sum payments that we make, or even monthly pensions that the person would qualify for if the injury resulted in permanent disablement. In an unfortunate event that the worker succumbs to the occupational injuries, for example, we then also pay surviving pensions to those that were dependent on the worker for a living, as well as contribute towards the payment of the funeral expenses. Where a worker then requires medical treatment, we then also take responsibility for paying the medical costs of the treatment for the occupational injury or disease.
So, Vuyo, in the instance where we referred to earlier, where there may be a very loose, very informal agreement struck between employers and employees, who will then be responsible? Who will be liable should an injury or disability occur, or even death in this instance?
So the employer, by registering with the Compensation Fund and complying with the Coida Act, They then transfer that responsibility to the compensation fund, and we take full liability for any cost that would arise out of that particular injury. But that is dependent on the employer registering the claim and registering with the compensation fund.
And in the event that they don't, is there a possibility that they as employers will have to cover this cost?
Well, in terms of the law, if the employer is not registered, the workers can come to the Department of Employment and Labour and speak to our inspectors. We will then make sure that we get the employer to comply and register so that we can then treat the claim. We cannot disadvantage the worker because of the employer who has chosen not to comply with the law. While we deal with the employer, we then also have an obligation to make sure that we assist the injured worker, provided we can get the documents that then confirm that this is an occupational injury that would have taken place at work.
And I think, these latest developments make it even more important for employers of domestic workers to actually register the said workers. So just in case someone is still not clear at this stage, Vuyo, in terms of how they go about registering and what it actually will mean for them, what it will entail on the part of the employer, can you just walk us through that process once more?
I think so. So the employers are required to register with the compensation fund. In the Gazette, we've actually provided a guidance as to how this can happen. We have developed online platforms that would enable employers to do so much quicker and easily. So they can then go to the Department of Labour's website and then register their profile online. Once they've registered on that profile, then they're able to then transact with the compensation fund, and they're able to register and submit claims on behalf of their workers. But all the details are in the Gazette.
Vuyo, thanks so much for informing us about that. Vuyo Mafata is the Commissioner of the Compensation Fund, talking to us about the regulations that were gazetted on Wednesday. And what this means now is that you, as an employer of a domestic worker, will now be legally obligated to actually compensate workers who incur injuries or diseases while on duty. And as you heard there from Vuyo Mafata, clearly outlining it for us there, so every more incentive to actually go and register your domestic worker.